Afternoon, YouTubers. Well, now you get a chance to continue on with a young man's experience in life. Hope you will enjoy it. Stand by. Well, as I left off, I was just getting out of boot camp. I was getting my second time in an aircraft. Same old puddle jumper. I went from Chicago to Buffalo, Buffalo to Syracuse, Syracuse to Albany, New York. The only thing that was different this time is when I came into the airport out at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, I was a brand spanking new Seaman apprentice. That's right, I now wore 2 stripes on my shoulder. Seems like back in the day, you joined as a Seaman recruit, which is basically 1 stripe, and when you graduated from boot camp, you got a 2nd stripe. And just out of coincidence, all your uniforms, your whites and your blues, already had the 2nd stripe sewn on. So they assumed, I guess, that you were going to graduate. Got home, spent 15 days leave. I don't have much of a memory of those 15 days, and I think that's because I had had my orders and I was going to A school. I was going to become a communications technician, whatever that was at the time. At 17 years old, I really didn't know. But anyways, I got onto the airplane again, and this time I got a longer flight. I went from Albany, New York to Pensacola, Florida, and reported into the Naval Communications Training Center at Pensacola. This was a neat place, but I soon found out that A school is nothing more than an extension of boot camp. It seems like 90% of the people at A school are either seamen or seaman apprentices or even some seaman recruits that were there. And you were treated just like you were in boot camp. Everything was marked, everything was being squared away, inspections, the whole bag. But the one thing that really got to me in there was lunch. Everybody went to lunch at the same time, and you lined up over at the chow hall in a great big one person line, asshole of the belly button, as they used to say, down the gangway. And you'd watch all these petty officers. It seems like in Pensacola, the rule was E4 and above had front of the line privileges. That means you'd be standing in line with 100 guys ahead of you, or it seemed that many, and this petty officer 3rd class, who's probably 6 months older than you, if he's even older than you in age, would go to the front of the line, pick up a tray, and get fed before you. You know, that really irritated me back then. But come to think about it, in the near future, I took advantage of those same privileges, so what can I say? I spent about 10 weeks in Pensacola, Florida, and then I got orders. Seems I had lucked out. I was going to be retrained at a joint service school at the Goodfellow Air Force Base in Texas. That was the next largest experience of my life. It seems 4 of us, 1 of us had a car, it wasn't me. 4 people, we all chipped in, and 1 guy drove his car, and the other 3 of us went around for the ride. Just so happened to be that time of the year, which is called Mardi Gras. Guess where we spent the first night? New Orleans. I got my first hurricane and my first taste of Pat O'Brien's bar in New Orleans. It seems like everybody was staggering around the streets back in those days carrying a glass from the Pat O'Brien's. Had their name on it. I guess it was the greatest souvenir you could get. Matter of fact, I think I still have one around someplace. We spent a good 3 or 4 hours in Pensacola, in New Orleans, and then we decided to push on. So we got in the car and headed out. Well, we didn't get more than maybe 5 or 10 miles outside of New Orleans, and the driver really got tired. Of course, we had done a wee bit of drinking. We had 1 or 2 adult beverages back there in New Orleans. So he decided to pull off the road and get some sleep. It was dark anyway, so we all thought it was a good idea. So we pulled off the road, made ourselves as comfortable as we could in the car, and slept. Come daylight, we found the next surprise on our great adventure. We had pulled off the road into a bog, into a mud hole. But the good Lord, looking after us, the drunks and crazy people, he didn't let the car get stuck, and we managed to rocket out of there, back out, and get back on the road and head for Texas. We drove along, it seems like forever. And finally we came across the border, and it said Texas. We came across at Orange, Texas. You know, Highway 10 that runs there from east to west, it seems, is a very, very boring drive. We spent the night in Orange, Texas at a motel. All four of us squeezed into one room. One of us was of legal age, and it wasn't me. Once again, I was, maybe I had turned 18 by this time. One of us got a pint, and they were passing the bottle along. That is the days before I drank hard stuff. In fact, I very rarely drank anything. Seems I was raised in a family where my father always had a 6-pack of beer in the refrigerator, and he would say, hey, if you want one, take it. Only rule is, if you have a beer and you drink it, you got to stay here. You can't take it out of the house, and you can't go out afterward. So I abstained. I was just not a drinker. That's something else I would learn in the future. Well, we sped along the next morning, got up bright and early, and made it into Texas. Texas, from Orange, Texas to San Angelo, Texas, is a long, 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 boring drive. We arrived there about, I'm going to say roughly 3:30 in the afternoon. Stopped in downtown, got into the bus station, or the YMCA, and changed from our civvies that we were into uniform so we could check into the base. So along about 4:30, we finally arrived at Goodfellow Air Force Base, San Angelo, Texas. That was a fun adventure, it really was. And I'll tell you something, one thing I learned very young. The Navy builds bases. The Air Force builds clubs and barracks and then builds the rest of the base around them. They really had nice barracks in there, something I wasn't used to. We were in a 3-man room at the time, and when I was down there, I made Seaman, so I was really getting the paycheck. Now I was making roughly $45 every 2 weeks. I was rich. Of course, the only trouble is we had to go out, if we wanted to go out and get a beer on base, the only thing they sold was 3.2. Takes a lot of 3.2 to get loaded. I hope you're enjoying following my career and my career path as I move along. One thing I will tell you about San Angelo, Texas. We cleaned the room, spit shined it. Have you ever heard about towel buffering your floor? You had these nice tile floors, and you put some wax down, and then you bring the big buffer in, and you lay a towel down, and you put the buffer on top of the towel, and the towel buffed your floor. It really made it shine. The only thing you have to learn when you're in San Angelo, Texas, don't leave the window open if you're going out. Because we got that room all nice and squared away. We made it over to the club to get a couple of brewskis. By the way, I was just learning how to drink them. And by the time we came back, there had been a dust storm, and everything in the room was covered with about 1.5 inches of dust and dirt and sand. It took us to about 2 o'clock in the morning to clean that place up again. Live and learn. Live and learn. Well, I hope you're enjoying my video. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my site, and we'll continue on with my next one. I knew I was going to talk about my trip on the Valdez. That's coming. Sea duty's coming. But when I get out of my A school in San Angelo, Texas, my next step was the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean. That is a story in itself. See you next time. Enjoy your day.